If you're getting value from working healthcare, I have a quick ask. Follow the podcast and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to the podcast. That simple action helps more physicians and leaders find these conversations and better understand how our healthcare system actually works. And that matters because we can't fix what we don't understand.
You ready? You got me running.
I am Meredith Hirsh, and this is Working Healthcare. I just interviewed Dr. Chad Perlyn, and what a story. His career does not move in a straight line. He goes from English literature to medical school, plastic surgery, Oxford University, Haiti, pediatric craniofacial surgery, an MBA, physician leadership, and now Dean of Nova Southeastern University's allopathic medical school. This conversation explores how one physician learned to lead by doing the next right thing, and what today's medical students need to understand about medicine, business, AI, hospitality, and the disappearing private practice model. You do not want to miss this. Dr. Chad Perlyn, welcome to Working Healthcare.
Thank you so much, Meredith. It is great to be here.
You are a pediatric plastic surgeon, and you have a slew of credentials. You're an Oxford-trained scientist, you're an MBA, you're a former health systems executive, and now you're the dean of an allopathic medical school. At what point did you realize your career was not going to fit inside a box?
That's a great question and a big one to start. No softball there. I have been blessed to have the career that I have and still continue to have, of course. And I have very much enjoyed getting to see medicine through its three aspects. First of all, as a practicing surgeon, I still practice. I love being a pediatric plastic surgeon, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. And I've been honored to take care of thousands upon thousands of babies in the operating room. As you said, I'm also a scientist, and so I see medicine through the scientific world, through discovery and research, through my PhD and the work there. Even though I don't do any basic science research anymore myself, having that background and appreciation, what goes into it, has been critical for me. And then as a healthcare executive and now academic leader, so it's been fun. I've gotten to see it all. It is not the career I thought it would be. I thought I would be a surgeon scientist. And 2010, the earthquake in Haiti happened. For those of your listeners who are in South Florida, they may remember it. It was this massive event in Haiti. In this famous moment with my wife and our family, I was watching the chaos on the television. I could see the devastation. And Brooke, who's an attorney, said to me, and I still don't know if it was a question or a statement, Meredith, she said, "You're going, aren't you?" And I did. And I wound up leading one of the very first teams of pediatric surgeons to Haiti, 2010, which just put my career on this totally different track. I never opened the lab and wound up in healthcare leadership. And here we are today.
And I want to talk about Haiti down the road in a little bit, but I really want to talk about you and who you were before medicine.
Oh, I grew up in South Florida native, born and raised. No physicians in my family. My dad, we joked, was a hot dog salesman. He worked for Nathan's Hot Dogs for many, many years. My mom was a dental hygienist, so I guess there was some medicine there, but no physicians in my family. I do have a pretty neat moment, though, that I can absolutely pinpoint when I just knew that I wanted to be a physician. I was young. I was 4, and my brother had recently been born. He was 6 weeks old, and I remember like it was yesterday when the phone rang in the house. I saw my mother answer it, and I watched her start crying. And it put me in the car. I remember the pajamas I was wearing. And essentially, it was a trip to come to the Children's Hospital. Back then, it was Variety Children's Hospital now, and Miami Children's, now Nicholas Children's, but it was Variety Children's. And the call was to come say goodbye to my baby brother, who was almost certainly going to die that night. And there was a young pediatric surgeon who came out and spoke to my parents and said, he's almost certainly going to perish. This was before MRIs and CTs and things. His only chance is if we do a laparotomy, exploratory surgery. He'll probably die on the table, but you want him to die in peace in the bed or fighting on the table? That was the choice presented to my parents, you can imagine. And I watched this whole thing. And even at 4 years old, when the surgeon came into the waiting room a couple hours later, I knew what the smile on his face meant. And he was like a hero to me, these superheroes dressed in their green scrubs. And they did save my brother, who's now almost 50. And from that moment on, I knew what I wanted to do with my life, which was be a surgeon to help kids. And eventually, we can talk about it if we have time, how I became a pediatric plastic surgeon. But that's what put me on the path early on. And I just grew up very fortunate, just having this dream and knowing what I wanted to do.
You studied English literature, though, in college at Northwestern. So I'm trying to figure out how that part of your education showed up in the way that you communicate with patients and parents and students and physicians, because somebody who wanted to be a doctor from the time, as my grandmother would say, knee high to a grasshopper, and then go study English literature. That's a
great phrase.
Doesn't make sense to me. Why did you choose that path, and how does that show up for you?
I knew I had my whole life to study medicine. And there's a great expression, once you start studying medicine, you never finish. And I knew that. And obviously I was pre-med, so I took all of the pre-med classes. But I wasn't interested in being a biology major or a biochemistry major. I love writing. I loved reading. And I think most importantly, I loved learning to interpret something. So you'd be given a poem as an English major and say, interpret this, right? Maybe there was a right, maybe there was a wrong, but most of the time, professors want to see how you thought and then how you could communicate thought and express that thought. And so whether it was poetry or the classics or what it was, I just thought it was a beautiful major because it let me learn so much. It let me critically think historical aspects from the time periods of the pieces. And it was just a great background.
Why pediatrics?
Well, obviously the story of my brother and seeing this group of surgeons save my brother's life, I wanted to help kids and children. And I had, till I got to college, thought I would be a pediatric general surgeon. So work on the intestines and bowel and general surgery type things. And then when I was in college, and this was before the internet, which is important when I talk to our young students about effort. People always ask about how do you get mentors, and it takes effort. I read a newspaper article in the Chicago Tribune about a surgeon named Bruce Bauer. And Bruce was making ears for kids born without ears. Make an incision in the chest, take out a piece of cartilage, hand carve it into the shape of an ear, put it under the skin, and create these amazing ears. And I thought it was the neatest thing. And I remember, this is pre-computers, pre-email, I took out my typewriter and I typed him a letter and stuck the Post-it stamp on it and put it in the mail. And to my incredible surprise, a couple weeks later, in my dorm slot, which never got any mail, I had a letter waiting from Bruce thanking me for the note and, more importantly, inviting me to come watch him make an ear. And he really became one of my first real mentors in life. And when I saw the power of that in a finite period of time, with your own two hands, you could change someone's life, make an ear, fix a cleft lip, these types of problems that these babies were born with, I was hooked.
When people think about plastic surgery, they think of aesthetics, right? That's the number one thing that comes to people's minds. But your work does specialize, obviously, with children. You're in pediatrics, but you focus on congenital or acquired anomalies and craniofacial conditions, vascular anomalies, and pigmented lesions. What do people misunderstand about
Yeah.
that specialty?
So it's a great point, especially in a place like South Florida where aesthetic surgery is all over the place. And aesthetic surgery is great and it's a huge part of plastic surgery, but it's not my world of plastic surgery. I did train general surgery and then plastic surgery and could do all of that, but then went on to do a fellowship in pediatric and craniofacial surgery. So my world, as you said, is really helping infants or children with either facial differences, so cleft lip, cleft palate, severe skull deformities where one orbit is down in the low cheek and the other orbit's up in the forehead, and we're literally peeling the face down and sawing the bones apart and moving the bones, to limb deformities, congenital breast issues in teenage girls who may have an issue, feet problems, abdomen. It's the last of the general surgeries, we like to say, because we are fixing every part of the body which nature or misfortune has taken away.
When a child is born with a facial difference, what are families really carrying with them when they walk into your office?
So that's a great question, a great point. And it's in part why I went back to be a scientist. So I went back and did my PhD late. I was a plastic surgery resident. Most MD PhDs do it early because I was frustrated that we didn't understand why. I could fix these kids. I was becoming a pretty good carpenter. But you would have a mom crying in the office. Why? Why did this happen to my baby? Why did this happen to my family? Was it the piece of sushi I ate or the glass of wine I drank? Of course, none of which is true. But not knowing why frustrated me, and I didn't want to spend my career. So I did that. On another note of this, it's interesting you asked that because I was just speaking to a student about this today. And we were having a conversation about learning to care for patients. And one of the favorite things that I say to the students, the secret to caring for the patient is caring for the patient, caring about the patient and their family in this type of case. And he said an example, and I said, when a family comes to me and there's a child with a terrible facial difference, and I like that word difference over deformity, the terrible facial difference, and a cleft lip, and it's a big cleft, and I meeting the family for the first time, and obviously they're so nervous and anxious and terrified what I'm going to say, and go through this moment, and I'm looking at the baby, I'm studying the cleft, but I look up, and I always start with a compliment about the baby, something true, right? A true compliment. But the family is so ready for the first thing to come out of my mouth to be this scary or frightening bit, and I will say, look at those eyes. Right? What amazing eyes. Who in the family does the baby's eyes come from? Or what a head of hair, whatever it is. I always start with that because to your point, Meredith, these families are so distraught in this moment and so afraid and so torn that anything that I can do to help humanize the moment, this is not about fixing the cleft. This is about fixing their child. And that's one of the things that I love and frankly that I miss now that I'm not doing so much complex surgery anymore, being dean.
You studied why children were born with these certain facial birth differences, as you put it. What did that research teach you that you couldn't learn inside an exam room?
Well, the first thing is science is hard and it's frustrating. And it's very different than being a surgeon. I will tell you, I struggled in the beginning, and my lab mates used to tease me because as a surgeon, it's about fixing it. There's a problem and we fix it. That's what we do. That's why we go into surgery. In research and in discovery, there's no fixing it. You're asking a question, maybe you get an answer, maybe you don't. It just leads to another question. And so my first few months in the lab and in a place like Oxford, an incredibly academic place, was challenging because I couldn't just fix it. I couldn't just get the answer. So learning to think like a scientist and to understand that was really key and fascinating. Ultimately, we did do some amazing work scientifically and had some very significant discoveries around why some of these babies are born this way. We helped develop a drug, which later became the formula for other things around this path. So it's incredibly productive time. And most of all, it gave me a deep understanding of embryology, genetics, anatomy, and the ability to explain to families what we knew and also what we didn't know, but to reinforce that this was no fault of any mother who often feel this tremendous sense of guilt or weight on their shoulders, even more so than the fathers, because of course they carry the babies. So being able to utilize that to help those moms in that moment has been very powerful.
In pediatric craniofacial work, the patient may be the child, but you're dealing with the entire care system. You're dealing with the parents, the schools, the specialists, the surgeons, insurers, and years of follow-up. How do you define a good outcome?
Well, there's so many. There's so many. And one of the things I often say to the families on that first meeting, make the compliment about the baby, and then I'll often look up and I'll say, we're going to be friends for a long time. And that's sort of my way of saying, like, this is a big deal and we're going to be working on this for a long time, but we're going to get through it together. Because you're right. It does take a lot. And a good outcome is a happy, productive child who's absolutely thriving. Sometimes that's thriving in a regular school, in a regular situation. Other times it's in a different. I love telling the story. I won't say the name, but if the family hears, they will know who they are, of a child who was born with a cleft and was deaf, no hearing in both ears, and a cleft, facial cleft, cleft palate, cleft lip. So you can imagine this family thinking their child may never hear nor speak properly. What a terrible thought for any new parent. And he is now one of the most elegant speakers I think I have ever met publicly, in public service, an absolute rock star. And there you go. So that's obviously a case of, extreme. What does great look like? What does success look like for these kids? But ultimately, it's a happy child and a happy family. And I leave it to them to decide that.
You went to Oxford to earn your PhD, and you were actually almost done with medical school. Why did you decide to go that route and take a deviation from the traditional, let's do 4 years of med school?
Yeah, so it was actually later even. I had finished medical school. I was almost done with my residency.
Okay.
At a really unusual time. It would have been strange, to your point, to do it at the end of medical school. Most do it sort of combined, MD, PhDs. I was almost at the end of my residency, which meant 3 more years of training and 3 more years of not getting a job and all such things. But I was very passionate about it. I knew I would be unsatisfied in my career as just a surgeon without having a deeper understanding of these problems. And as I mentioned before, I thought I was going to spend a part of my professional life looking to solve them as a surgeon scientist. So the other thing is, most MD PhDs, like in our medical school with our MD PhDs, they do their PhD really at a time when they think they know what they're interested in clinically, but you're still in medical school. And oftentimes you get out of medical school, start your residency, become interested in a particular problem, and it may be nothing that your PhD was in. So the advantage for me was that I got to focus my scientific effort exactly on the clinical problem I knew I would spend the rest of my life working on, the rest of my professional life. The disadvantage was, if you're an MD, PhD, you often get medical school paid for. So that did not happen, but still worth it.
I laugh because my husband was working toward an MD, PhD, and he and I met during his PhD training, and he took off between third and fourth year. And he thought he knew what he wanted. Going back to what you said, most medical students have no idea, even though they think they know. And he went through a year and said, to heck with this, I'm going back to medical school. So he never finished that work. It would have taken him 5 years. How long did it take you to finish your PhD work?
It took me 3 years. it was an incredibly productive 3 years. The surgeon in me and the work effort there. I actually did not think I was going to do it. After the first year, though, it was so productive that I wound up staying for longer and got it done. And defending my thesis at Oxford was one of the more challenging days of my academic career, I'll tell you that, in my black cloak. You know, for the listeners, Harry Potter is based on Oxford and the life at Oxford. And I ate in that dining hall, the one that's in the movie, in my tuxedo and black cloak many a night. And it was challenging, but an extraordinary experience.
You expected to become a scientist and you wanted to open up a lab, but you didn't. You actually pivoted your path again.
Yeah.
Why did you choose to pivot? And do you feel like you lost out on something going that trajectory?
No, not at all. It's been an amazing path, a path that I never could have anticipated in my wildest dreams. But I'm so thrilled how it's wound up. So, you know, as we said before, I finished and I was at WashU and had this PhD. And WashU, as many of the listeners will know, is one of the meccas of academic medicine. And so I finished having been trained in that model and was hired by FIU when FIU was just opening the medical school in South Florida. And back then it was Miami Children's Hospital before it became Nicholas. And I had this amazing job, by the way, back at the place that had saved my brother's life. So you can imagine the joy for me of kind of coming full circle, this place where the dream began. Somehow I wound up there and would eventually become one of the leaders there. But so the earthquake happens and I go to Haiti and I volunteer to lead one of the first trips with some other great leaders and folks. And then I help kind of run the Haiti effort for the next couple of months as it's all in full force. And to make the long story short, I knew very little about leadership. But I did know, as you and I have talked before, how to just do the next right thing. And in this overwhelming situation of chaos, so much going on, I was this young green surgeon who no concept of leadership, no concept of what it meant to drive an organization, be responsible, but I did understand how to do the next right thing. And because of that, shortly after that whole experience had wrapped up, the director of surgical services, it's essentially our surgeon in chief, that's what we call it, the director of surgical services, was leaving. He was a very senior surgeon to take a very prestigious job up in New York. And I got tapped for that job. And I wasn't even out of my first year out of my residency. And I had some amazing mentorship, folks like John Ragab, a neurosurgeon, and many of the senior surgeons with hair far grayer than mine. Now I'm the guy with the gray hair. But at the time, there were many senior colleagues who I was concerned would say absolutely not. But they were incredibly supportive of me, which put my career into this leadership track, this major leadership role very early on. And from there, one thing just led to the next. And years later, I was the president of Nicholas Children's Pediatric Specialists, which is the subsidiary of the health system that runs the clinical enterprise with the physicians. So it's been a neat journey. And then obviously from there, I made the leap to academics.
I want to go back to 2010 with the Haiti earthquake, because it did obviously have a major impact on you and pivoted your career again. What did you see and what did it ask of you? Not necessarily just, okay, I'm going into leadership. Give me some details, Chad. Like, why in those few months when you were in Haiti were you like, I have a greater calling?
Yeah. I knew that I had a skill. It was not a developed skill at that point because I had been trained as a surgeon, but I was not an experienced surgeon by any means. I was, a very young attending. I knew I could help. And back to saying I didn't know what leadership was or looked like, and this story is so real. We had got in a plane together and got in the plane donated. It was a pretty big plane, and we had a lot of people and a lot of gear on the plane. And it was a couple of days after the earthquake. And we get on the plane, and I'm one of the last people to get on the plane, which means I happen to be sitting in seat 1A, right? If you think about a regular plane.
Mm-hmm.
And the airfield, the airport had been destroyed. It was very unsecure. The Air Force was just taking control of it. It was still a lot of pandemonium on the ground. And the pilot came out and said, we're going to have a problem. There's going to be some issues when we land the plane. Who's in charge? And we really hadn't gotten to that point at it. But I happened to be sitting literally in that first seat. And he said, well, I'm just going to talk to you. And that was how it all started. And 2 minutes later, I found myself on the speaker like the flight attendants, starting to make plans and organize and figure out how to do the next right thing, how to get people off the airplane safely, how to unload it, what we were going to do next. And it just became one step after the next. And it was an extraordinary experience. And I'll share with the listeners one other story from there, which was maybe one of the most profound moments of my career, if not of my life, in terms of just raw drama. So we had gotten in the early days, the government was allowing critically injured patients to come in on aircrafts through some of the smaller airports, and the customs folks were there to process everything. Eventually that shifted when they sent the Mercy ship and the Comfort, the big naval ships. But in those beginning days, that's what we were able to do. And so we had gotten an aircraft from a donor, someone who owned a private plane, and the pilots brought the plane, and there were two critically injured kids, both sick as sick can be. And so the plan was to get the kids to the airplane and the airplane to South Florida and bring them to the Children's Hospital. And this had all been arranged. The problem was that the pilots weren't comfortable with the plan. And the pilots were unclear as to what was happening with the government and the regulatory issues about coming in with people into the States from Haiti, right, from another country. So I'm at the hospital, and I get someone running up to me and says, "There's a big problem going on. You've got to get to the runway right away." And what was happening was the U.S. military was controlling at this point very short windows of ground time. There were so many planes coming in and so few working runways. You landed the plane, unloaded it, or picked up your passengers, and you took off. And they were not messing around. Well, these pilots refused to take off. And the kids were on the plane, and they refused to take off, and they were going crazy. So this comes to me, and I wound up, the one and only time I've ever agreed to be on the back of a motorcycle, because I don't like motorcycles, but a Marine gave me a ride on a dirt bike down to the airfield. And I get there, and the two pilots are going crazy. They are using every expletive in the bad word dictionary about getting these kids off their airplane. And I see what's going on. I see the aircraft a person from the Air Force getting into it. And I just look at the situation, and I walk onto the airplane. Rather than yelling at the pilots or getting involved in a shouting match, I say to them, "Gentlemen, I need to apologize for what I'm about to do to you." And I said, "What I am about to do to you and what I am about to say to you, it's not fair. And the burden that I am about to put on you that you will carry for the rest of your lives is not fair. And I'm sorry. And I'm going to apologize in advance." And I paused and I said, "But you have to understand, these children's lives are in your hands. That's it. This is the moment right now. It's black or white. If you fly, they have a chance of living. If you don't, we will take them off the aircraft, but they will die. And there's no other way that I can say it. And I have to say it like that. And I hope you are able to do the next right thing. But if you can't, we understand. And that'll be that." And I said, "I'm going to step off the plane and give you a minute." And I did. And they closed the door. And a minute or so later, they opened the door and they said, okay, we'll go. And those two kids are alive today. And I wish I knew the name of those pilots. I hope they hear this one day and reach out to me so I can give them a hug for their courage and bravery. So it was examples like that, examples that in outside of that type of environment, I just never in my life would have gotten the exposure to. And I grew tremendously as a human being during that time.
You've said that you didn't have, quote, leadership skills when you went to Haiti. Obviously, you did, and you had not cultivated them to where you are right now, but you had these basic skills already. Even if you didn't call them leadership skills, what are those basic skills? And I ask Chad because there are so many other young, I don't even know how to put it into words myself, but I loved your story, but just young professionals, young physicians who want to do the next right thing, and they don't know how to verbalize what leadership is to themselves. What are those skills that you had during that time that you've been able to build upon?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot lately. Unfortunately, it was because my father passed away last week. He was an amazing, amazing person. And both he and my mom, how they raised me, but he in particular, at his funeral, I told a story about one of my very first memories of him. And back when the gas station attendants used to pump your gas. And I remember it was an older guy, a Jamaican guy who was pumping the gas. And I was so surprised by my father's warmth and engagement with him that even as a little kid, I asked him, Dad, why did you care about that man? And he just looked at me with surprise and said, why wouldn't I care about that man? And that's just how I was raised. And so to answer your question specifics, I think, empathy, curiosity, communication. I have a little sticky note often on my desk. I'm looking, I don't have it now, but I must have fallen off. But it reminds me of the 3 H's. Stay humble, stay honest, and stay helpful. And if you can do those things and how you make decisions and lead, you may not make the right decisions. You certainly won't always make ones that make everybody happy, but at least you have a true north in your actions.
I've heard you say a lot, your personal motto, do the next right thing. Where did that come from?
I don't know. It just did,
Well,
yeah. Maybe the first time I heard it was actually from a cousin who I heard say DTRT, which is do the right thing, right? And that's often, trying to make a decision. Should you go to the party? You don't want to go or whatever. And it's just like, do the right thing, right? Do the right thing, DTRT. I don't know if along the way I picked up, do the next right thing, but certainly that's how I learned to manage chaos in difficult situations. When you don't know what to do and it's overwhelming, just do the next right thing.
You are highly credentialed. You have your MD, you have your PhD, and then you decide to go back and get your MBA from the University of Miami. Why did you make that decision? And do you think that it was necessary to grow in the leadership role that you're in right now?
So this is a great story, and I love sharing this with young physicians who are interested in leadership or maybe an MBA or another opportunity to serve others. So I got called one day. One of my mentors, I talked about Bruce Bauer on the plastic surgery side, Matt Love, who's currently the CEO of Nicholas Children's. Matt was one of my mentors. And one day I got called to the CEO's office. And of course, you get called to the CEO's office, the first thing you think is, oh, what did I do, right? Matt sat me down and said, hey, I want to ask you a question. Are you interested in doing an MBA? And I kind of thought for a second, and I'll share with the listeners, I'm a little embarrassed to say I was surfing a lot at the time. I loved my time in the water, and I was like, if I go to do an MBA, I won't be able to serve. I was like, I'm interested, but I don't know, Matt. Thanks. Let me think of it. And I was just super wishy-washy. And I walked out of the office like pretty much having said no. Then the next day, and it's interesting how things happen in our lives. Next day, I ran to the chairman of the board of the health system who was there for a meeting. He's coming down the hall. I'm going the other way. And he says to me, hey, congratulations on that MBA. And I realized in that exact moment, I was not being asked if I wanted to do an MBA or not. I was being asked, was I interested in being developed and mentored to become a leader of the health system? The MBA was just a way that the system was willing to invest in me, but it had nothing to do with the MBA. And I knew in that moment, and I think this is important for the people considering these things, I knew in that moment what would happen if I said no. I did not know what would happen if I said yes. But I knew if I said no, the doors would close. I would not be asked again if I was interested in any leadership role, any position. And the investment and opportunity and mentorship would go to someone else. So I knew that, and luckily I realized it. And I said to the chair, oh, I'm so excited, delighted. And of course, my next phone call was to Matt saying I would be honored to do the MBA. It was the right decision. I later would be asked to become the president, as I mentioned, of NCPS, of the group, and have a major healthcare executive job and help lead the physician organization, which is amazing. So was it worth it? For me, in my role, 1,000%. 1,000%, particularly on areas where I was weak, finance, those type pieces. And that's been a tremendous asset for me. Do I think every physician, if you're going to run your own private practice or interested in startup, do I think it's necessary? No. But I certainly think for people who want to operate at a corporate level, it is a necessary credential.
Physicians don't often go and get their MBAs when they're given a leadership opportunity. When I worked through my MBA at the University of Florida, I was in an executive MBA program, and there were 50 students in my cohort, and 4 were doctors.
Yep.
And so they were working on that track too. But a lot of times leadership is very informal. It's service training, becoming excellent on the clinical side, and then they suddenly manage teams and budgets and strategy. For those who don't seek the MBA track, what do you think is wrong with the informal model?
I think there's a couple of things. And like you, I was at University of Miami where I did my MBA in healthcare through a program like that, which was terrific. But for those who don't seek it, how do I answer the question about the informal model? I think there's certainly, like anything else, there's a language, there's a vernacular, there's a skill set that you develop. And you did your MBA, so you can appreciate this. Could you do what you do without it? Sure. Do you do it in a more polished way, in a more efficient way, a more sophisticated way? Probably. And I think that the best part about it is human nature tends to let us do what we like to do. So we tend to gravitate to our strengths. Doing the MBA made me realize my weaknesses. And I think people who are leading, and they may be great leaders without the education, they may not appreciate their weaknesses as much as folks who, like yourself, who did an MBA, and you really get to see what you're good at, and what you like. And I always say, focus on what you don't like when you're in school, so you're strong at that later.
It definitely helped. It makes me more comfortable speaking to my accountants. You're right. It makes me more comfortable when I sit at the table because you have that vernacular that's really important. You, in your high-level leadership role now and in leadership positions you've carried for several years, you still practice medicine. And you told me that you spend about 20% of your time still in the clinic. Why is that important to you?
Yeah, it's really important to me. So as we said before in the intro, my primary job today is at Nova Southeastern University. Nova is major university in Florida, largest educator of healthcare professionals in the country now. So we're very proud of that, and largest educator of physicians in the state of Florida with our two schools, the MD school and the DO school, as well as dental school, nursing, all other things. So I serve as the executive vice president at the university and the chief medical officer for the whole university, and I oversee all healthcare and the health system, and then also dean of the School of Medicine of the MD College, which is great. But Nicholas is always has a place in my heart. I was so proud that I could work out when I came to Nova. I was sad to leave Nicholas in my leadership roles, but thrilled that I was able to not leave the family and still be able to operate. And it's a part of my soul, who I am as a surgeon and helping kids and families. B, it keeps me legitimate and keeps me in the game. So I understand what goes on and the struggles of the EMR or whatever the challenge of the day is. I get it, and I'm right there. And C, it lets the students see me leading by example, which I think is really important.
How are today's medical students different, do you think, from when you were in medical school?
Yeah. I think our medical students are at a very interesting point in our times. And I'll get to AI in a second. Before even adding AI, there's two big pieces that I see, and I talked to them about this. One is communication skills. So, the Egyptians communicated with hieroglyphics, right? You and I could end this podcast and I could text you a strong arm doctor smiley face and hand praying or thank you thing, and you would know exactly what I meant, right? Thanks for a great, strong podcast, right? You can't learn to communicate with other human beings sending emojis. And sadly, that's what this generation of kids has grown up on, right? They text, they communicate, they TikTok, whatever it is. And the skill set, right, to have a conversation, to really engage with someone, that's been lost. That's been lost in this generation. It's not all of them, but in general, I think it's very fair to say that communication, eye contact, one-on-one dialogue is something that we shun from, right? It's a lot easier to go to the chat bot than pick up the phone and ask for help. So number one is that. Number two is the medical students right now are facing an unprecedented period of loss of trust. Loss of trust in institutions, loss of trust in science, loss in trust in scientific method, loss in trust as to what defines an expert, who's an authority, and sadly, loss in trust in medicine and in the medical system. So we spend a lot of time talking about that, how to deal with that, how to navigate through that, and that piece. And then you take all of that, and of course now add AI to the mix. It's a challenging time for these young students. The AI piece, I'm not worried about. People ask me all the time, do I think AI is going to end medicine? And I say, no, I think it's going to liberate medicine. I hope it does all the things that the doctors are so burdened down by now that are just done digitally. We've already seen it, just the beginning of the AI note-taking services. It's going to be incredible in a few years. And if so many of these tasks can be managed by the AI systems, allowing the physicians to spend time what they will need to do best, which is communicate one-on-one with other human beings, that I think will be magic for medicine, because that we've lost that. We've sadly lost that to some extent over the last few decades. Since
you are an English literature phenom, I'm going to ask you, with a few adjectives, what kind of doctor are you trying to graduate? You talked about the compassion, you talked about the communication skills. What adjectives would you use to describe the type of doctor that you want walking out of Nova Southeastern?
So empathetic, for sure. It's a key word, and I choose empathetic over sympathetic because whether or not we are ill or sick, today we all will be. We all will be. And I think that's really important. That recognition that we all will be sick. We all will have loved ones who will be sick. We all will have issues and challenges. Getting our docs and our students to appreciate that is really important to me. It's really important to me. Compassionate goes along that same line with empathetic. Being available to our patients. And when I say available, I don't mean office hours. I mean being available, sitting at the bedside in the room. We talk about this with our students. When was the last time you had a doctor sit, right? Come sit on your bed in the hospital room. Of course, technically able and competent, obviously, but that piece will come with education and AI, and the knowledge will be democratized. So I'm less worried about the knowledge as I am about having empathetic physicians who are hardworking, who are dedicated, who will make themselves available to their patients, and available not just in time, but available in emotional space and time, and ultimately who can lead. And we spend a lot of time. We have a leadership book club. We try to teach leadership in this medical school different than others around what it means to lead and what are the challenges and how to navigate it, so we can produce the next generation of the finest physicians that's out there.
Where do you think AI belongs in medical education right now?
It's certainly a big part of it, and it's coming more and more, and we're going to see it more and more. Obviously, in the education piece, it's going to be the end of memorization, because the information's there in a nanosecond, and as the AI agents for healthcare become more sophisticated, it'll be there. We talk about, and obviously people ask about education and think it's, how are we going to use AI to teach the students? But there's so many more interesting questions. So for example, research publications. And I know you know this and all of the listeners. We collectively, scientific society, only historically has published the positive findings. So you do an experiment and it worked, and hooray, you publish the results, right? You could have done 999, like when the light bulb was created in that famous expression, right? You could create 999 failed experiments, and none of them were ever shared or published because there just was no way to archive it and mine it and understand why they failed. Today with AI, that information becomes just as important as the positive, why it didn't work, because now you can populate it and cross-link it in a way that was never feasible before. So whether it's in research or other things, it's going to be game-changing. We don't know it yet. I don't pretend to predict the future. What I do know is it will create a new set of skills, which is not going to be how smart you are and not going to be how savvy you are, but it's going to be how you communicate, how you take that information off your little device, whether it looks like our iPhone in 5 years or something totally different. Whatever the device is, how you interface with that device to interface back with that person in an empathetic, compassionate, and available way. And I think that will be the key.
And at the white coat ceremony, I love that you give every student the Unreasonable Hospitality book.
Yeah, you're good.
Why that book?
So for the listeners, what Meredith is talking about, at the white coat ceremony last year, I decided to give a book. And the book was called Unreasonable Hospitality, and in my speech, I said, why is the dean giving the medical students this book about food and wine and how they took 11 Madison Park, a restaurant in New York, to be the #1 restaurant in the world? And the answer is because it really has nothing to do with food and wine. It has to do with how they built a culture and how they taught and educated their team to make people feel valued, to make people feel seen, to make people feel heard. That was in the staff, in the customers, and in the whole culture that they created. And it's just a magnificent way to share that example, which is often missing in medicine today. And of course, unreasonable hospitality, what's the key word in hospitality? Hospital, right? And what's missing so much in hospitals in our healthcare system today, right? Hospitality, where we started, that warm, engaging touch, right? That desire to care for another human being, to reach out and really take someone else as your charge, their wellness as your charge. That sadly, to some extent, is missing today. And I hope we're able to regain some of that.
I think it's missing in all aspects. And I had never thought of the fact that hospital was part of hospitality, but I would say it's missing in so many sectors right now. And I can't really pinpoint when that happened for me. I feel like it was about during COVID time because everybody could cover themselves up with a mask. They could be rude to others and not be seen, or they can eliminate the ability to have physical contact and just hide behind a screen and still in 2026 do that. If we're looking at these young physicians coming into medical school, are we expecting too much of them? Are they equipped for this?
Let me break that down. Are we expecting too much of them? I would say no.
I would agree, no, but I'm a little nervous.
I would say no, because this is, in my opinion, the most extraordinary profession. It's not easy. It's not the best job, right? You work long hours. You give up a lot of sacrifices. You don't create generational wealth. Physicians obviously do well, but you're not creating generational wealth. But as a profession, it's the greatest profession there is, because there is no honor like taking care of others. So do we expect too much of them? No. Are they prepared for it? Not always, right? Not always, because of some of the issues we talked about before, which is why part of our job is the curriculum and the education and the opportunities for them to get exposure and develop their skills. So they leave here prepared and ready for residency, and then residency they grow again another layer, and it takes time. But I'm confident in our students and who we send out in the world, and obviously very proud of them.
If I look at the American Medical Association statistics back in 2012, about 60% of doctors were in private practice. And just in 2024, it's plummeted to 42%. I have a private practice. You've worked in a hospital setting. Is private practice something that you think is achievable for young physicians?
I think that part of it depends on the specialty in today's world. So there are certain specialties where the financial models may allow you to, as the old expression goes, hang your shingle and have a single practitioner private practice. But it's hard. It's hard. And many of the specialties today, for good or bad, the mechanisms of how the specialty works, the reimbursement, the time to reimbursement, it's just not feasible. What's interesting today on the employment side is, as you said, the majority of physicians are employed. Many are employed by large hospital systems or universities, like I am. Others may be employed in a quote private practice, meaning not by a hospital system or a university, but it may actually behind the scenes be owned or invested by private equity. It may be part of a large multi-specialty group or other things. So there's a lot of different models that are out there today. But I do think the model of the individual doc having their own shop and running it soup to nuts, as they say, without any support is becoming more and more challenging.
I want to end this with a couple of next right thing scenarios, because I love that motto of yours. What is the next right thing for medical education? Aside from Nova Southeastern, what would you like to see of your colleagues across the country as the next right thing for medical education?
So I think there's two big pieces. One is around interprofessional learning and teams. And physicians are obviously key parts of teams, but often we don't work in the best team environments, and that's going to become increasingly important. Two will be the integration of AI and figuring out what that looks like. And I certainly am no AI expert, and I don't have the answers. I love to use an example, though, of a friend of mine who flies, I forgot what the biggest plane is today. I think it's a 777, whatever the jumbo jet, whatever the biggest plane is, he flies it as a commercial pilot. And I recently asked him, what's it like to fly that huge plane? And he laughed and he said, Chad, we don't fly the planes anymore. He said, we manage the systems. And I think about that with what AI is going to do to medicine. And to some extent that worries me, but I'm also okay with it because we have to learn it and understand it. How will we use this new tool and learn to manage the systems? It's not going to replace us, but we will have to learn how to use it and how to manage it, which is going to be critical.
What do you think the next right thing for physicians is?
Oh, that's a great question. You got me on that one. I would say it's probably going to be around the same space and around, it's going to be very easy and very tempting to let technology do things for us. And that's okay. And I made that point before that I'm actually excited for that. That's a good thing. That we want to unburden ourselves from a lot of the mundane so we can go on. The challenge, and maybe here's your answer on doing the next right thing, is not letting the machines step in for us to the full capacity that they will be able to. And what I mean by that, there's been studies already that have shown that if you take a radiologist's reading accuracy, for example, and I'm going to grossly paraphrase, if not make up these numbers, but it'll make the point for the reader. And you have them read 100 X-rays, they'll read it with a great accuracy rate, right? Because they peer review it. If you then let them read it with AI as a tool, that will go up. It will increase when you have the human and the AI doing it. Makes sense, two sets of eyes, right? If you then take away the AI, what do you think happens to the accuracy rate when they're reading independently again?
Right, it drops.
It falls below the baseline. So maybe I'd answer your question, what's the next right thing? Making sure we never fall below the baseline. Mm-hmm. Because it will be very easy to do that. And that's what we have to make sure we don't do, that we manage the system and not the other way around.
You have spent your career reconstructing what is injured, malformed, disrupted, or not yet whole. So I'm making a bit of a caveat to my traditional last question. If you could reconstruct one part of our American healthcare system, what would you fix first?
And I think to answer that question, we have to go back to the very beginnings of this profession and what this profession was built on and what it means. And that is compassion and trust. And those two pieces we need to restore. And I know it's easy to say because there are so many problems I could have answered. We could have talked about the electronic health record. We could have talked about the payer mechanism. We could have talked about rates and finances and access. There's a dozen things we could have talked about. And there's 24 more that challenge physicians every day and make this, as I said before, a challenging job and bleeds away from the beautiful profession that it is. There's a difference between the profession and the job. And so if you ask me what I would do to fix first, as naive as it sounds, and I know that it's naive, I would want to start back with ensuring that physicians are able to practice in a way that lets them express their compassion and lets patients trust them again. And that is spending time with patients, making eye contact with patients, reaching out and touching the patient on the hand or on the shoulder when appropriate, and engaging with people one-on-one again. There is no profession out there that lets us engage in such a vulnerable way with other human beings. Not law, not finance, not accounting, not hospitality, like medicine. When you are there for a patient or a child or the family, in often their most vulnerable moments, and you can make a difference in that person's life and that family's life, whether that difference is a positive outcome, which obviously we strive for, of course, but even that difference, as I just went through, I mentioned I lost my dad, the care and compassion, even when my father could not be saved in the end, that will resonate with me for the rest of my life, how those people made me feel, how they treated me at the time of my dad's passing. And whatever we can do to get that back as our number one priority in this profession, that's what I would want to start to work on first.
Well said. Dr. Chad Perlyn, thank you for joining me on Working Healthcare. If this conversation hit home or made you think a little differently, don't keep it to yourself. Share the episode, tag a friend, or post about it on social media. Connect with me on LinkedIn to keep the conversation going in between episodes. If you've got a question, an episode idea, or someone you think I should feature, send me a note at meredithhirsh.com. Thank you all for the 5-star reviews. They help more listeners find the show. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Tune in weekly as we explore the inner workings of healthcare, because you can't fix what you don't understand.